to what level the discussion and the implementation of this particular bill has reached. And in so doing, I'll also try and address the questions that have been raised in terms of why is it better, how will it be implemented, and who will be responsible for it at different levels. So basically, the need for an East African law on HIV, and to make it clear for those who are not from East Africa, what we have within the East African community is called, we have an East African treaty that is signed by all the 5 countries within the East African community, who are Burundi, Rwanda, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. And this particular treaty has got provisions that indicate and say that if a law is passed by the East African Legislative Assembly, that is the parliament at the East African level, and all the 5 presidents agree to that law, then that law applies in your own country as if it was a law that was made within your country. So that is the advantage we have in East Africa, that we do not have model laws, but we have bills. And their bills, if agreed upon by all the heads of state, they become the law that works within your country. They supersede any other law, or they are stronger than any other law that have been operating in your country, because they have been agreed upon by the heads of state. And then we'll be discussing, when you're making the process of passing this law, before the heads of state agree to it, it is normally brought to the national parliaments, and the members of parliament are able to debate and see whether this is a useful law for their region or for their country or not. And that's how we've gone about business within the East African community in trying to ensure that we have harmony on particular issues. So why do we need a bill? And basically the key reason why we need a bill was that there was a protocol that was called the Common Market Protocol that was signed by the head of the states within the East African community that would address the issue of free movement of goods and services among the people of the East African community. That would mean it would make it easy for a Tanzanian to come and do business in Kenya, or a Ugandan to go and do business in Burundi. And in doing so, it was seen that the movement of people from one place to another carries certain social consequences. And given the prevalence of HIV within the East African region, there was need to see how best can we harmonize dealings of issues of HIV. How best do we harmonize such that if I'm a person who's living with HIV in Kenya and I travel to Rwanda to do business and I've forgotten my ARVs, am I still able to access my ARVs within the Rwandan context, or do I have a difficulty because Rwanda may have a different law on issues of HIV? So basically that was the key driver, and civil society members who were working on regional issues felt that there was a need to also ensure that as we try to harmonize movement of people, trade and goods and services within the East African region, there's also a need for us to see how best can we have issues of HIV working within a harmonized process. And so that being the case, then it was agreed also that there were 5 countries in the East African region, but not all countries had specific HIV laws. Some had laws, but the laws had different provisions and varying provisions that were not compliant with what human rights says and what best practice provides in the particular issue. And so then this would also be an opportunity to have a look at all the laws and to be able to harmonize those particular laws. So what the process entailed was the identification of consultants who went around each of the countries, all the 5 member countries, spoke to all stakeholders in terms of civil society, in terms of government representatives, and in terms of different sectors to get their views about what is the position in their country about HIV issues. Do they have any laws, and do these laws comply with international standards? There was also a desktop review to see whether the laws within the countries are complying with international provisions and with the best practices, and also with the circumstances of the country. And so to that end, there is a comprehensive audit report, which I believe Yanaso can be able to share at this meeting, that clearly shows what is the gap in Burundi, what is the gap in Rwanda, what is the gap in Tanzania, what is the gap with the Kenyan law on HIV, and what is the gap with the bill in Uganda, and how best can this law cover this particular gap. So the process involved the country consultations, And after the country consultations, there was a regional consultation where the findings of this research was presented again to different stakeholders from all the East African countries in one meeting in Arusha in 2009. And from that particular meeting, then clear issues were identified based on the findings of the report and what the stakeholders felt would be relevant for the East African situation. So clear issues were identified that stakeholders wanted to see within the law. And so those are the issues that were eventually then picked up at the meeting in terms of issues of non-discrimination, in terms of issues of access to medicine, in terms of issues of how to go about testing for different categories of people, and also looking at issues of privacy and confidentiality. So these particular issues were agreed upon in Arusha, and again there's a meeting report from Arusha with also a list of the stakeholders which can demonstrate whether it was inclusive or non-inclusive. And so from that meeting the issues were then picked, and the consultants were then mandated to draft a law, but the law was to be drafted together with the representatives of the attorney generals from each of the 5 countries to ensure that the laws comply with the East African Treaty and are also taking into account the needs of the country. So the drafting of the law was done in January 2010, and a consequent meeting to validate and discuss the provisions of this law happened in February 2010 in Kampala, where the same group of stakeholders who were in Arusha plus a few more other stakeholders were brought together in Kampala to be able to discuss this law line by line and issue by issue. And so that particular discussion took place in terms of spelling out the concerns that people had about the law and what they would like to see in the respective provision. There were definitely controversial issues that could not be agreed upon at the Kampala meeting, and some of the controversial issues that could not be agreed upon included the issue of whether to name most at-risk populations or not in the particular law. The other controversial issue included the placing of responsibilities on people and government on the fight against HIV. There was a controversy on the issue of criminalization of deliberate and willful transmission. There was also controversy as to whether you should have compulsory testing in the case of where people are supposed to get married. There was also concern about the issue of disclosure of HIV status to third parties. And there was also concern about issues of HIV and the right to work. And lastly, there was concern or controversies about issues of prisoners. When I say there are controversies, what I mean is that there were divided arguments. There were those who were supporting certain positions, and there were those who were against certain positions to certain extremes. And so the law had to get a middle ground, because you cannot get a law that has extremes and a law that misses the extremes. So those are the controversial issues that came up in the Uganda meeting. But even after that was taken into account, then this was the final bill that was particularly arrived at, and is the bill that is going to be presented before the East African members of Parliament. And basically, the purpose or the objects of bill are covered within this bill. And quickly to just state them out is one, the bill wants to promote a rights-based approach in dealing with issues of HIV. And a rights-based approach basically means